Welcome to the root of all success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs unlocked success and how their stories can help you do the same. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason has built multi-million-dollar businesses that have been featured in Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine. His life's mission now is helping entrepreneurs live what he calls #the exit lifestyle. Introducing TEDx speaker, mastermind leader, author, entrepreneur, cigar aficionado, motorcycle enthusiast, and host of The Root of All Success, the real Jason Duncan. The real Jason Duncan.
I'm the real Jason Duncan. This is the Entrepreneur Master Series. And the Entrepreneur Master Series is a webinar series, live webinar series that I host a couple of times a month where I bring in an outside guest expert like we're going to talk with today. And we're going to do a deep dive specifically for entrepreneurs on how can we tap into this wisdom that the guest expert has to make our businesses better. How can we manage that? So let me thank you again for being here. And in just a minute, I will welcome our guest into the Zoom webinar. But I want to thank, we got lots of people that have joined in live today from all over, it looks like all over the world, mostly here in the United States. We have some people from outside the country. We're glad that you're here. But the Entrepreneur Master Series is something that's free. It's free value that I offer as a business coach to anybody that wants to join in. One extra little benefit is that my Exeter Club Mastermind members get extra stuff on top of this. So if you're interested in looking into that, we can talk about that. You can go to the exeterclub.com. You can read about that. But let me go ahead and welcome Dan Vega into the show. So Dan, go ahead and turn your camera on. Come on in. Let's chat for a minute, and then we'll set you loose. All right. Hello,
buddy. How's it going?
Pensacola. How's weather in Pensacola?
Hot, man. And I was a little discouraged when you said it's the first day of summer. We got like 100 more days of it.
Yeah, so it's my cousin's birthday. I've always remembered this. She and I are the same age. I turned 47 in March. She turns 47 today, and so I always remember her birthday because it's the first day of summer. But thank you for being here, man. It looks pretty behind you. It looks like the skies are blue. It's kind of like it's here in Nashville.
Yeah, it's a nice day. It's hot, but it's a nice day.
I think it's going to get up to the low hundreds here in Nashville later this week. And we've had no rain for a while. So people are starting to water their grass with their hose pipes. They're starting to get serious. The irrigation system is not doing the job. So they got to get serious on it. But thank you for being here, Dan. I know that I want to kind of give an overall introduction of who you are so that everybody kind of understands what's going on. But I want to put in the chat. So I want to call everybody's attention to a few things that are going to go on in the Zoom. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a little button there that says Q&A. It's got a little bubble. It looks like it's like a Q&A. I want you to go ahead and click that and have that open on your screen. Everybody go ahead and do that, no matter who you are, where you're at. Click on that because we are going to be able to take live questions. So when you type in a question in the Q&A, Dan and I will both see this. We'll be able to answer the questions live here on the show for you. And this actually is going to be pushed out later on my podcast, The Root of All Success. So if you're listening to this later, thank you for listening. But next time you ought to join us. Join us live by going to therealjasonduncan.com/EMS. But go ahead and click on that little Q&A bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then if you have a chat, if you have a question you want to ask specifically to me about something that's not related to what's going on, you can just chat and just make sure you click hosts and panelists or just host, and you can talk directly to me through the chat. But thank you again for everybody that's here live. Let me introduce today's guest. So Dan Vega is coming to us from Pensacola, Florida. He is an American entrepreneur, a speaker, a business coach, a talk show host, a producer, and an investor. And he started his first business at the ripe old age of 19. And he's written and spoken in the field of business for over 25 years. And he's achieved a lot of success in different areas, including sales, marketing, management, corporate restructuring, consulting. He understands business top to bottom. He has helped many companies become profitable, multi-million-dollar enterprises. He was also considered a top expert in assisting companies to secure funding, and he's been connected with as many as 200 private equity investors, institutional lenders, venture capital groups, angel investors, and he holds ownership in several successful companies and is personally invested in several spaces in the market. Some of those are film and television, environmental, technology, health, and fashion. He actually has I'm not going to give it away, but he's got this movie idea he's working on now. He shared with me not too long ago. It's really, really interesting. He's also one of the co-founders of a book publishing company, Indigo River Publishing, down in Florida. And they have dozens of best-selling authors. He's coached everyone from celebrities to some top companies that have been listed in Forbes magazine. He specializes in helping existing companies maximize their profits while reducing their costs and their overhead. And although he's recognized as one of the top motivational speakers today, he doesn't claim to be a self-help coach or motivational guru. He recognizes the need for self-improvement and positive thinking. And however, he believes that motivation alone is not going to achieve success. And there's other things you got to do, which we're going to be talking a little bit about today. His belief is that any business problem and most life problems can be solved through proper math and hard variables. And that really is the thing we're going to be talking about today on this episode of the Entrepreneur Master Series. He started his television journey a few years ago as the producer and host of Tuesdays with Dan, which was a late night business talk show that reached over 35 million homes per week on ABC. The talk show's popularity quickly became and made it one of America's fastest growing talk shows. It was filmed in front of a live studio audience, featured weekly guests, included entrepreneurs and top celebrities. And that's not even all of it, but that's where I'm going to stop today for Dan Vega. I'm honored to know him personally, to call him a friend. Dan, welcome to the Entrepreneur Master Series, man. This is going to be a good conversation today.
I'm excited. That was very painful, but I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Isn't it weird when you sit there and listen to somebody else read your intro? Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, my people need to shorten this thing. Yeah. Everybody always says that, but it's true. Like that's your accolades. And if people are taking their time to listen to this stuff, we need to know who are we listening to?
Yeah, I'm 51, and I had a guy that I've been mentoring for a while. He's like, I've looked at your video bio and all these things, and people are talking about this and that. It's hard to believe that you've done all these things just at your age. I said, hey man, it's hard for me to believe it, and I was there. When you hear it, it's like, whoa.
Well, you got started early. You got started at 19, and things kind of blew up pretty quickly for you. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the subject of today's episode is the secret to calculating your probability of success. And the way I put it in the advertisements and the promotion for this was that, sure, it might be possible, but is it probable? And that's a question that we all have to ask ourselves as entrepreneurs. And is it probable? Possibility, anything's possible, right? But probability, maybe not. And so what you're going to help us understand today is that there's a mathematical way through variables and hard variables to calculate the possibility and the probability of success for a specific business venture. Sure. So before you get into like the hard variables and the math that we're going to talk about today, give everybody a little bit of story about your background and how you process things.
Okay. Yeah, the short of it is, I'm from Los Angeles, and both my parents, they never had a lot of financial success. They were great people. My father was a salesman of many things. My mother was a teacher's aide. And, so of course I grew up in a scarcity environment, right? Which bills do we pay? Which ones do we push? It was surviving. It certainly wasn't thriving. And again, my parents did the best they could, and they loved me, but that's all they knew. You can't teach what you don't know. School, I was a terrible student. I think I graduated with like a 1.5 grade point average. I was like, if I got D minuses across the board, I was like, yes, where are we celebrating? And it wasn't because I couldn't do the work, but I just wasn't engaged. I kind of process a little bit different way, and I just didn't want to go that route. And also, when no one cares at home, why should you? Like, right? If you're a teenager, people don't have accountability. It's like, well, I shouldn't care either. What kind of helped was, and it's helped my situation. It's not fun, but as you know, I have a condition that I suffer with called synesthesia. Synesthesia is like, it's kind of like a form of autism. So your five senses kind of get crossed. So some people can smell color or see music, and there's tons of drawbacks, believe me. So I'm pretty much a mess. I have a group of people that surround me that have to take care of all these things for me. But sometimes it can lead into having a high inertia towards certain things. And for me, I've always had a high understanding of mathematics. So it's not really a learned thing, it's just a thing. So when I was 13, some people started taking an interest in me that were at UCLA. They wanted me to kind of spend weekends there and live part-time on campus to kind of study different things and work with people. And that was a great kind of exit out of my environment. My father was a very great guy, but had a lot of demons and substance and alcohol abuse and other types of abuse. So that was a real eye-opener for me. And then by the time I was like 18 and a half, some guys in Silicon Valley, they took a real interest in working with me and helping me as well kind of understand how I process and articulate things, but working on bigger projects. And those were my first mentors. So, I would look at their level of success, not just financially, but their family and their faith and all the things, how balanced they were. And I aspired. That was something for me to aspire towards and ask a lot of questions. And I think because of my age, they took pity on me that I'm like, look, I don't know how to save money. Can you show me how to do this? I was just very vulnerable, and they certainly showed me the way. And about the fifth or sixth mentor, I ran into a guy that was one of the Forbes 400. He was number 25 at the time on the list. And I think timing has a lot to do with success, because he had lost someone, one of his sons close to my age in an accident. I didn't really have a father figure, and that kind of filled a void, and it was a mentor-mentee relationship. But very quickly, as I grew, we started collaboration and partnerships and things like that. So that was very helpful. But what I want to talk about today, first let me state this, that anybody can be very, very successful. And when I say successful, I'm also talking about financial independence, very wealthy. So every year I have a program where about 20 people a year, I kind of mentor them. And my claim is, I always say, within 60 months or less, somebody could put together generational wealth. Doesn't matter what starting point you're at, but 60 months is quite a long time. 5 years, you can put together generational wealth. And I've proven that many, many times over the years, where I mentor some people, and I got to tell you, some of the people that have become millionaires, I don't want to call them nitwits, but their scope of business understanding at the time was a 1 out of 10. But by giving them the right education and giving them the right metrics to focus on, it's just math. It's not based on natural talent. We want you to have some talent. We want you to be a hard worker. That's really not what's going to get you across the finish line. It's having the right metrics and doing things in a very specific sequence. And that's why you'll see people that are brilliant, smart. They're kind of like they do everything well. So what is the saying of jack of all trades, master of none? They do a lot of things very well, and they have a high intelligence, even high business acumen, but they're just not putting it together in terms financially for themselves. I know some other people that might have a net worth of $50 million, and when I go hang out with them and visit, I'm like, I can't believe this person is a millionaire, let alone 50 million. Like, it's shocking to me that they kind of just landed in it. And the reason why is, I'm not taking anything away from them, but they're doing something in a sequence that's working. And the other people, despite best intentions, are maybe out of sequence. And that's what I really want to do a deep dive into.
So sequencing goes with math. And so math is kind of your thing. You see everything as mathematical probability. I know that, sometimes the way you see it might not come to fruition, but you're still seeing it as a mathematical possibility and probability. Yeah. And there's a funny thing that happened that I haven't even told you about. You and I were together just, a month ago, and we were talking about something specific. And I don't know if you remember this, but at some point during the conversation, you looked at me and said, 70% chance. I don't know if you remember that, but you said about 70% chance. Well, as it turns out, when I went to have a follow-up meeting about that issue with somebody else here in Nashville, the meeting ended with the guy looking at me and going, I give this a 70% chance of happening. And I didn't tell him the story. Yeah. So sequencing and math, there's a way to look at this. So what would be, as we're here today as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, we're looking at opportunities to become successful in something. What's kind of step one? What do we do first to think about, okay, if it's in the sequence, we got to start step 1, not step 10. What's the first thing we need to start looking at?
I love that question. And I'm going to start with the problem first, because this is going to eliminate all the things that we're doing now for the most part. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm 18 and a half, 19 years old, and I'm living still at home with my mom most of the time, at least. And I get this call. So this girl, she was going to UCLA, but her father was a CEO of a Fortune 1 company in the Bay Area, and he would fly her back and forth, right? So she comes up to me and she wants to get my phone number, and I'm like, yeah, right, I want digits. And of course, I didn't know it was for her dad. So he calls me at home and he says, my mom answered, and then, hey, there's some guy on the phone. He says, hey, my name is so-and-so. Do you know who I am? I was like, no. Do you know the company, I said, yeah, I've heard of the company. He said, well, I've been reading this stuff about you, and I've been talking to friends about you, and I'm really intrigued, and I want to know if I paid your way, I would love for you to come to the Bay Area, and I would love to meet with you. Would you be open to that? So my mom always told me, don't take rides from strangers, but this guy has a Gulfstream, so how bad could he be? So I went, and I was terrified, man. I'm this little kid looking at this. I'm going, there's like guys in suits, and I sit down, man. I'm 145 pounds with like acne, and they're like laughing. So the guy, the CEO, he says, listen, how familiar are you with business plans? I said, not at all. I'm a kid, so I don't write business plans. He's like, but if you think about it, a business plan, it's really just, it's a bunch of random sequences. Most of them are random, but it's a bunch of mathematical sequences. For instance, your vision statement is kind of what you see in your head, right? Then you got your mission statement, which is what you and these 3 people set out to do to accomplish the vision. And then you got geographical territory, we're going to set up camp. And that's probably based on where you're living or who gives you the best tax break, right? Variables. And then you got your product or service that you perceive to be good. And you got the gap of profit after you sell it. And you're looking at what the what the competitors are selling it for, what you think you can yield in your area. And you got the strengths and weaknesses of your team and opportunities and threats, particularly in your marketplace. And he said you'll have different other random variables in terms of marketing and trajectory and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the business plan, you'll have the financial stuff, fixed overheads, right? So he says, in my opinion, it's just a bunch of random sequences. Right away, I'm like, I agree, for sure. He says, so here's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if we had you sign an NDA, if we gave you access to our corporate books, which at that time were making, double-digit billions in profit. So I was terrified. Could you find the holes in it? Mathematically, could you find if it's congruent or not? So I said, yeah, I think so. So I went through and I found some mistakes right away. But here's the problem of what people do. The realization I came to about 4 years later is we're doing business completely the wrong way. And it was built originally on a flawed mathematical sequence, particularly in the US. So we build a business very linear, right? So our vision statement, then our mission statement, and then our goals and strategies and product, we do it in a very linear way, right? So imagine you're building a business like this, and there's a cliff coming, and you're building it like this, and you get it all the way to the edge of the cliff, right? So now you get to the end of the business plan, and it's like, the end of the business plan is the meat and potatoes. If all this math is right, so to speak, and everything that I put in there, all the metrics I put in there is properly added, subtracted, multiplied, and divided against my fixed overhead, this is what I stand to make. That's what you're going to learn at the end of the business plan. So we get to this cliff, we build this linear thing all the way to this cliff, but we don't have a crystal ball. So we can't figure out what that's going to look like, 3 years from now, how much money am I going to make, right? So here's what we do, and I freaking hate it. People will do speculation of future market share capture. So they'll say, well, so they just came up to a cliff. There's no more data that's historical data or present-based data. The rest is now is future-based data, right? And they're not there yet. So they'll say, well, it's a multi-billion-dollar market, and if we could just get 1% of that market share, or hell, 1% of 1%, they'll plug in the other side of the cliff and they'll build a bridge, right? But it's not real. It's not going to work because it's speculation of future market share capture. Nothing about that is congruent. So when they do that, they're breaking congruency, and it's just pie in the sky. You can't do that. And everybody does it. I'm an investor myself, so 10 times a week I get people with pitch decks. Hey, I need $5 million, I need $10 million. And then I say, well, I'm getting collection of the variables. I'm starting to get excited. And then they hit me with, it's a multi-billion-dollar business and we're going to make $80 billion in the next 10 years. I'm like, okay, how much have you done now? We've done about 80 grand. I'm like, how do you get to 80 billion? Forget billion. How do you get to 80 million from 80 grand? What did they do? They just kept replicating the metrics of 80,000 and they just scaled it to 80 million, right? That's not going to work. So here's the answer, okay? So to fix this problem, so I wrote a program when I was 24 about how business is completely wrong. It's built on a wrong structure. And here's a new way to do things. I was pretty much laughed out of the room, to be honest with you. And then later IBM came along and was like, hey, we like what you're saying. We want to work with you. So to fix this problem, right? You have to start with the end in mind. You have to go to the other cliff. And you got to think about 4 questions. So let's start with the first few. And I'm going to give you a real example just so everybody listening is like, I get it. Okay. So I always draw a big triangle on a piece of paper. So like, let's say somebody hired me to help them with this. I draw a big triangle on a piece of paper, right? And I'm going to ask 3 questions first, right? So the first question is, how much money do you want to make? So as you know, I spent a lot of time in the seminar business. I would do big seminars about this, and I would just say, like, how much money do you want to make? And people would be like, how do I pick that number? Is it just out of thin air? Like, I don't know, 5 million feels good. Yeah, just pick a number. Like, we have to start with the end in mind, right? It's kind of like a GPS system. If I was coming in Nashville to see you, and I just kept driving, and you're on the phone and I'm on the phone, and I'm like, Jason, tell me, and I'm going by the reception of the call. I take a left, I'm like, that sounds worse. I should have taken a right. I'm just trying to find you organically. Dude, we're never gonna get together. The way that it's gonna happen is you're gonna give me the actual physical coordinates, and then let's say GPS will reverse engineer it all the way backwards with the proper data to the starting point. But if I don't have the original coordinates of the place I need to be fixed, I can't reverse engineer it with the accurate data. So we'll build this way, and then I'll just take a guess in your neighborhood, or I'll plug it in with some fake stuff to make it try to fit, like speculation of future market share capture, but it's not real, right? So the first thing is question number 1, how much money do you want to make? And I'll give you a real scenario of this. I met with some guys in the Midwest, and Barry and John, these 2 guys, and Barry's like, after an hour of talking, I said, Barry, I still don't know what you want from me, and I don't know what you do. Like, what do you want? Like, how much money do you want to make? Let's just start there. It's simple. That's the end goal. How much do you want to make? I'm trying to get the destination. He said $1 million take home, right? So that's one side of my triangle, $1 million. The other, so that question number 2, what time frame do you want to make it? He said 12 months. Great. I'm loving this because I almost have an equation. So on the other side of the triangle, $1 million, 12 months. At the bottom, here's question 3. What field do you choose to do this in? He said the mortgage business, right? So I'm loving this now because I have basically an equation, right? Now, question 4 will tell you if your number's too high or too low, or if there needs to be an adjustment. Because question 4 is, what is your probability rate? Now, Jason, I got to tell you, if you put 1,000 people in a room, I would even say 10,000 people in a room, and ask them how many of them check this variable, you will not get one hand. Nobody checks this, okay? So what's the probability rate? So here's what you have to think about. If Barry was to make $1 million in 12 months in the mortgage industry, where does that allocate to him to have to play in the game? Is it going to put him in the top 25 percentile of the mortgage industry, top 10% of the mortgage industry, top 1% of the mortgage industry? Where does he have to play in terms of the market, right? And that'll tell you kind of probability. So I said, what's your probability rate to do these 3 variables that you gave me? And he said, I have no idea. So I said, well, let's do some research. So after a couple of weeks, we figured out that every year in the Mirage Hotel, they have this big mortgage convention, and everybody that's somebody is going to be there. It's all the top people. And I happen to know one of the keynote guys. So I said, let's fly down to Vegas, and I guarantee all the 1%ers are there, all the top. We'll be able to find the answer, right? So here's what we learned after about 6 days. We learned that if you make $250,000 a year take home in the mortgage industry, you're in the top 10% of the whole industry. Now, are there guys making $1 million a year? Of course there is. But if you make $250,000 take home, you're in the top 10%. If you actually make $500,000 a year, you're in the top 4 percentile. And if you make $1 million a year take home, then you're not at 1%, but you're well into the 1 percentile. So here's the question. Is it possible for my buddy Barry to make $1 million in the mortgage industry? Of course it's possible, but is it probable? No, man, he's got more than 99% stacked against him. Starting, he's got an uphill battle, like pushing a stone up a hill. 99.9% is stacked against him, right? So for me, I'm out on that scenario. I don't try to bet on 1% or 5%. So for me as an investor, whether I'm investing my time, money, or both, I need a fixed range of probability. I need a certain fixed range that I'll play, okay? And it's probably going to be a little lower than you think, but here's my fixed range of probability for me. It's 17 to 19%. 17 to 19% is my fixed range of probability, okay? So here's what that means. And I'm speaking in general terms right now. In most businesses, okay, I can, if I'm studious and I buy $300 worth of books and I listen to podcasts and I'm assertive, in 3 to 6 months, I can put myself into the top 15 percentile of most industries. Now, if I'm trying to be a brain surgeon or a mechanical engineer or a chemist, probably not. But in most business applications, right? If I'm studious, I can generally put myself into the top 15% of a field. And the reason why in business as entrepreneurs is most fields, the herd is 85%, right? So I'm not trying to be rude, but if you think about the people that run our lives, I was trying to get a credit card. I had fraud on a credit card and I was trying to straighten it out. I talked to so many people trying to deal with this thing, right? Most people are just this step away from being a zombie, right? They just barely have a pulse when it comes to business. I hate to say that, but they go to a place, every Monday and they go to a thing and then they do a bunch of things. On Friday, they collect the thing, then they spend the thing, and then they buy things and they go back to the thing on Monday. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no passion. They're just kind of existing to pay bills, but they're not living. We both know this. And this is the herd, 85%. So I can't tell you how many business plans that I've written for companies where I'm there for 4 days and I'm trying to really build this mathematical sequence for wealth, right? The first day is like an interview. Hey, how do you guys do this? I don't know anything about your industry, so I'm going to ask a lot of questions. How does that work? How does this work? They're like schooling me, right? Oh, here's how it works in our business. Day 2, I'm asking tons of questions. They're schooling me, giving me all the data. Day 3, I'm asking questions and they're going like this. We'd have to find that out. We're not sure, but why is it relevant? We don't see that that's relevant. I'm like, oh, here's why it's relevant. Oh, okay. Let us do some due diligence. We'll get back to you. Day 4, they're coming to me and they're saying, Dan, let me ask you a question. How does it work in our industry on this? Like, we're talking 4 days. They're asking me questions about their industry that they've been in for 25 years, right? Because I'm studious. And the nice thing about living in today's world is the top 1%ers of every field, top 1, 2%ers, they're putting out podcasts like yourself. They're putting out books. They're doing this, they're doing that. So it's easy for me to identify the 1%ers and get on the juice, so to speak. And if I'm studious and I'm willing to go, sign up for some podcasts and some classes and buy some books and, whatever, I can identify who they are and really figure out a lot of their secrets. They're giving the farm away, right? So getting into the top 15 percentile of most business things, there's not a lot of attrition. It's just barely getting over the herd. Then the real work starts. For going from 15% to 10%, tons of work. Going from 10% to 5%, exponentially more work. Going from 5% to 1%, thousands of percent more work, right? But just getting over the herd is pretty easy. So honestly, when I look at an investment of my time or money or both, I'm thinking about probability rate. Okay, these guys are telling me I'm going to make this much money in this time frame, in this opportunity or field. Where does that have to allocate us to play at in the field? Do we need 90% of market share? Do we need this? Do we need that? If it's like probability rate is, just get over the herd, I'm in. But if it's calling me to have to play into the top 5% of a field, I'm out. I won't bet on even me because I don't like the odds. It'd be kind of like this, Jason. If me and, let's say, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and Elon came into somebody and said, hey man, we got an opportunity and we want you to be our 4th partner. Well, it would be amazing, right? However, we're all going to put some capital in and we're going to have to put a lot of time in, okay? And being that, we'll go ahead and put in the capital, Jason. What we're looking from the 4th person is to put in a lot of time, but we'll put the capital up. But I want to be upfront and honest with you. It's probable that we're not going to get it done. In fact, there's less than a 1% chance we'll succeed, even with us. How much win would that take out of your sales? It'd be like, oh God, I thought I had an opportunity here. That's what happens in business. Sometimes we have the best intentions, we're hard workers, we have a good business acumen, but we set up a structure unbeknownst to us. We happen to select random variables that just are not probable. They're just not equatable, okay? So in my estimation, a business plan is about 1,500 to 2,000 random variables, right? So you have your vision, it might be several components, your mission, you have your team, their strengths and weaknesses, opportunity threats in the marketplace, your goals, product, how much you buy it for, sell it for, profit margins, fixed variables, a fixed overhead. Like there's a lot of random stuff. Most of it's random. Geographical territories, where you moved or where you wanted to set up camp, people that you're bringing on, proximity usually, or friendships of who you perceive to be sharp, right? All those things are fairly random. So forget 1,500 variables. If I were to just think about 10 random numbers right now, all right? I'm gonna write these on a piece of paper. So let's say 160, right? And another number, let's say 4, and let's say 510, and another number is, let's put a 9, and let's do a bigger number, 2,118, and a 2, and we'll go with a, I'm trying to do a calculation here, 780, and then we'll look at maybe 11, and then we'll do 50. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's only 9 numbers. Okay, now if I were to have these random numbers that I just picked, and I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to divide 4 into 160, add 500 and, or excuse me, times it by 510, divide it by 9, subtract this number here, then cut the number in half by 2, then add 780 to it, divide that into 11, and then cut the number by 50%. And then I'm like, okay, guys, what's the answer? Like I just asked someone, what's the answer? Dude, who knows? It could be millions. It could be millions to the negative. It could be billions. You ever been on a calculator and you just keep hitting numbers and then an E comes up and it says enough already? We can't calculate anymore. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, or it could just be, based on the sequence that I gave it, $312, basically. All that work, $312 is what we're going to net. So my point is this: there's no way that we could pick 1,500 random variables, and then we run all the way to the other side of the cliff, and we get back and we say, okay, if all this math adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides correctly, I just need a gross 700 grand this year or $1 million, so I could take home 300 or 275. Come on, 275. The mathematical probability of you being able to figure out what that math is going to stop spinning on and where it's going to land, it's possible, but it's not probable. It's in less than 1% probable. In fact, Lotto has a way better chance, okay? So that's what we do, is we build this bridge, and then we do speculation of market share to build this thing back to make those meet, but it's not going to work, okay? So think about it in these terms. The thing we need is the destination first. How much money we want to make, what time frame, what's the probability rate. You can find the probability, or what field, what probability rate. So here's some questions you can ask to figure this out. How many players are in the space, right? For instance, how many real estate agents are there in Florida? Or how many hair salons, how many people that do hair in Florida? Or how many people in the US? Sometimes when I'm looking for a national number, I do state by state. It's a little more accurate. And then I look at the average salaries or the average income. You have to do a little bit of research, but the majority of the stuff that you need is historical data or present-based data, right? So sometimes you just do a Google search and it'll give you the answer. So it might take you a couple of days to fill out the probability, but you have to figure that where does it allocate you to play? So there's some industries, for instance, Jason, that you got to ask this question before you start. So let's say somebody wants to be a videographer. They're like, I want to be a videographer. Man, I'm not knocking that field. But going into it, you should know that the top 10% of the whole field is only making high five figures, right? Now, is it possible to make 6 figures being a videographer? Yeah, it's possible, but probability rate's more than 90% against you. Okay, so again, I'm not knocking it. There's exceptions to the rule. Let's say you want to cut hair, right? And that's the license you're going for. I'm not knocking that. People need to cut hair. But going in knowing that 10% of the field, if you make yourself into the top 10%, you're still only making high five figures. Now, is there people making $1 million cutting hair? Yeah, they're on the shows like Paul Mitchell. They're on stage. It's possible, but the probability rate. Now, there's other industries. Let's say I know you do some public speaking, Jason. If you could put yourself into the top 22% of public speaking, just 22%, you don't even have to break the 20% mark. Just get above the herd, not even above the herd. You still got one leg in the herd, okay? You're 7 figures. How about app building, right? Particularly video game apps. If you could get into the top 25 percentile of video games, building video games, you're in the high 7, low 8 figures. So this is a question we have to ask before I'm all about passion, figure out what you're the most passionate about and then go into that field. We both know passion is a key. But I also check probability rate saying, what's my probability of how much, the question of how much I want to make time frame field, is it allocated me to play above 15, if it's in that range of, 7, 12, or 17 to 19%, I'm in. But if it's, in the top 10% or more, I'm out. I have to be out. I won't even bet on me. And I'm not knocking multi-level marketing companies because I have a lot of friends that have made a ton of money in those things. But for me, I won't do them. And the reason why is it's black and white for me. Probability rate of those companies is about 2%. Now, is there people on stage at the quarterly or annual event saying, I was nowhere and 8 months ago, now I'm making $50,000 a month? Of course, that's real. But they're interviewing the top 1-2%ers. It's legit, but it's just not probable for everybody, right? So this is certainly a question that we have to ask very quickly. Now, here's question number 4, or do you have something you want to enter?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things.
Okay,
And I had some questions from the audience too. So let me ask this now. I'm tracking you. So the probability is, if you look at different ranges of probability or success rates in particular industries. So let's use cutting hair as an example. Like, so if you say, hey, I want to make 7 figures cutting hair.
Yeah.
I mean, the probability is so tiny because it's what is less than 1% of the people do it. Is there anything in the calculation that says, okay, because so few people do it, there is the opportunity that I uniquely have that could push me? And I'm not talking about delusions of grandeur, because I think lots of entrepreneurs have that, but is there a way to calculate in my unique ability puts me in a position where I would succeed easily into that space where others wouldn't?
Sure. And it also could be unique selling proposition, right? And that would change your law of probability. So it's like, okay, Jason Duncan cutting hair $1 million a year, the probability rate's 1%. But Jason Duncan cutting hair in this town with this unique selling proposition or offer and my unique talent, that also will recalculate the probability, right? So to your point, there could be no one has this, or let's say some business field that you're going into and there's no shortage of people in that field, but you have a specified knowledge that no one else has. That gives you a great advantage, so the probability is going to go way up. But even with those things, I'm very cautious about taking on. Now I've had those things actually come up, Jason, where it's like, look, this is 10, 12% probability, but I feel like I have specified knowledge, or I got a guy on my team that has something unique, or I have a very unique selling proposition or hook. I'll go in on the 90% stacked against me kind of a deal. But I'll never go lower. I don't care what the advantage is. I'm not going past that.
So you're looking at the fixed range of 17 to 19%. So the herd is in that, right?
85.
So 85%. So you're wanting somebody to have a 17 to 19% chance of succeeding at the rate that they are projecting. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If I could just be studious and identify the 1-2%ers in the field and take 3 to 6 months to really do my homework and immerse myself, can I at least get over the average? Let's take podcasts, for instance. I read an article that you didn't know. How much did you know about podcasts before you started a podcast? I mean, you knew a lot about business, right?
Yeah, not much about podcasting.
Okay. So I read an article not too long ago. I don't know I think it was Wall Street, that said that the average podcaster gets to like episode 7 and they quit.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
The numbers were massive. Like everybody starts a podcast, they get to 7 or 9, they're done, right? So you come in and say, dude, the probability rate, I love that, because the herd is quitting at 7 or 9 episodes. If you just got some stick-to-itiveness and you have a resolve and you got some piss and vinegar and you read some books and you talk to some other successful podcasters, you're going to throw your hat in the ring and you can beat the herd, right? Now, being the #1 podcast in the country, I believe you could do it. It's certainly possible, but it's going to be a lot of work, as you know, and you're certainly climbing, by the way. But honestly,
shameless plug. I just dropped my link to my podcast in the chat.
Nice, thank you. So you can pay me later. But that's a great example of like, well, I'm not the herd, and I'm going to go do my research, and I'm going to talk to other successful podcasters, might even interview them, find commonalities, and I'm going to give it a shot, right? So yeah, we have to now let me get back to the Barry example. I think this will actually answer some questions. And then, so when I look at this sheet that he gives me, I want to make $1 million in 12 months in the mortgage industry. We find the probability rate to be, 1% basically, right? So I go back to Barry and I say, Barry, listen, here's the way I look at it in my mind. I look at it like Barry kind of gave me 3 threes, right? That's how I look at it. He basically gave me 3 threes, and he said, Dan, like he gave me 3 fixed positions, right? 3 fixed metrics, 3, 3, and a 3. And he said, Dan, make it 11. Dude, math never lies. No matter how good I am in business, I'm not a magician. I can't make 3 threes be 11. It will never be 11, no matter how bad you want it or need it to be 11. It just can't. So I have to go to Barry and I say, look, I can't make this 11, but here's what we can do. You have 3 fixed positions right now. Allow me to unfix 1 position, right? So instead of 3 threes, I got to make one of them a 5. Or let me unplug 2 positions that are fixed. We could leave 1 fixed. Let me unfix 2, and let's put 2 4s. but we can't have three fixed metrics that don't equate, right? It just won't equate. So in that scenario, I would say, Barry, do you want to make a little less money? Maybe we go down to 350? No, I don't want that one to be unfixed. Oh, okay. Do we want to pull out the timeline to 18 to 24 months? Because that increases our probability rate. Nope. Well, the only other thing is we got to change fields. We got to play to your strengths, but find another field that allows you to do what you do, but give you a higher probability rate of success. Does that make sense?
It does. That was actually the question I was going to ask next, is like, there's a way that you can screw around with that to say, well, $1 million a year in that industry is not likely, 99% not likely. So you can either keep trying and button your head against the wall or change one of those things, right?
Yeah, and so think about it this way, and this is very important to write down and just really think about. If you really have been, let's say that you're just pushing hard, you're pushing that, you've had some success in business, but you're just not where you believe you deserve to be or could be. You're not at your maximum potential, and it's no fault of your own. You're working, you're putting in the time, you're putting in the, paying the dues, putting the hours in. It's probably not your fault. I'm going to be honest with you, because forget 1,500 random variables. When we build a business, here's the awesome thing about math. The way that math works is that two things. One is math never lies, and number two is at some point of math, it has to start repeating. It repeats itself, right? So when you start a business, we don't need 1,500 variables. We don't need all the how we're going to be successful in that industry. As you know, Jason, if we wait for all the how we're going to do it, man, by the time we collect all that data, the world has changed so much, we need a new how, right? And we'll never get out of the gate. But instead of collecting 1,500 variables, let's say, when you select the first 6 or 8 variables of your business, now, how fast would you collect the first 6 or 8 variables of a new business? Probably before you open the doors. What's the business going to be called? What's our domain? What's our product or service? What can we get it for? What can we sell it for? Right? How are we going to compensate our people? Right? The first 6 or 8 decisions are made like that, right? So when you select the first 6 or 8 decisions, here's how math works, is that we randomly select these 6 or 8 variables, randomly, and then the way that we randomly put those variables together, unbeknownst to us, it creates an inevitability. Think about what I'm saying. We randomly select 2 friends that we're going to start a business with. We select Nashville, Tennessee, because we like it, and that's where my wife's from. And we select this product or service because we perceive to be a way to make money. And we perceive that we're going to compensate this much in this area because we feel like that's what people need to make in this area. Like when we make those 6 or 8 decisions, we randomly select them. And then the way we randomly put them together, it creates an inevitability. So now that math is going to stop spinning somewhere. It's going to, by the time that math or those variables add, subtract, multiply, divide correctly, it's going to land on a very finite number. The problem is we're just not there in history to know what it is yet, right? So if we could fast forward in history, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, whatever the business plan is for, we would know that it's like, I hate it. Or, oh my God, we're going to make a lot of money. But we just don't, we're not there in history yet, right? So that's the problem, is a lot of people have the best work ethic, they have the right business acumen, they have the right knowledge, they're actually in the right field. But the way they selected their variables randomly, they put them together, it put a roof on what their potential is, and it was a really short roof where they can't even stand up straight, and you can't out-earn the structure that you create. So sometimes I'll go in and I'll just change 1 or 2 variables. So let's imagine 1,500 variables on a board, and it's an even number. By the time I add them all together, it's even, and then they're telling me to make it odd. I'm like, that's not going to work. It will never be odd number. It's an even number, right? But if I change 1 variable by 1 number, right, the whole damn thing calculates, correct? That's exactly what it is I'll do an interview and I'll look at all the variables in their business. I'll change 1 element. I'll make it 3 or 4, right? I'll change 1 marketing strategy, and all of it equates now. And they're doing less work for a lot more money. And they're like, what is going on in my business? This feels crazy. Sometimes we get lucky where we'll hire a new person in, and it's not such as specifically what they're doing or their role in the business, but the dynamics and the variables they brought to the business was the exact tweak to go from all that math equating or not equating. And now things are thriving, and we're giving the credit like, wow, since this person showed up, we are thriving. but it's not necessarily what that person's performance, just their performance. It's that they brought some more metrics that made the whole damn thing equate, if that makes any sense.
Makes perfect sense to me. So we've got a few questions that have been asked in the Q&A chat. So I'm going to go ahead over to those if that's all right.
Sure.
So the first one is coming from Ira. Ira, thanks for being here today. He asked this question. He says, with so many data sources and information out there, do you have any resources that you lean on for data that you know that you can trust? And I assume what he's meaning is, how do you know that only the top 1% make $1 million and the 14% make 250 or what? Like, where do you find that data?
I've searched for that for so long, man. That's such a great question. Here's what I found. You have to find several credible sources. You know, like I find a lot of stuff from like Forbes or Wall Street Journal, and I find that to be pretty credible. But I need congruency of several people basically saying the same thing. So they're different artists, but they're painting a very similar picture of what certain climate of business looks like or a certain thing, and then I'll go with that. What I have found to be the best in terms of a measuring stick to figure out the data or that answer that question of probability, you're going to figure out 10 good Google searches. So how many players are in this space? What's the average person make? Sometimes I have to do it by state. But here's the other variable is I'll go identify leaders. I'll go identify 10 leaders in that specific industry, and I'll ask them, hey, if somebody did this or that, what do you think that would make them have to play at? You'll get a consensus that's very accurate. Like those 10 people that are at the top, they'll say something that's so congruent, it's almost all the same data. And then based on that and doing a little bit of research in the market, you'll be able to get a good guesstimate. Sometimes you're like, look, my probability rate seems like 31% or 30%. You have a little room for error, right? A little bit of margin for error. But here's the one thing that we gotta maybe caution ourselves against is so I coach all these people. I have a doctor that just recently did this to me. Hey, Dan, I might not have told you this, but, and he's gone through all my training. He's gone through all this. I might not have told you this, but like 4 years ago, me and another doctor started a business. He brought the other doctor to meet me. Guy's like, yeah. And we're doing, it's so awesome. We're doing this. Here's our vision. They have this clinic they're opening. They're painting the whole story. And then I go, okay, what's your probability rate of success based on the metrics you told me? They go, we don't know. I said, well, how do you monetize it? They go, see, and that's why I wanted to come to you, was we have everything else done except for the monetization, and we got to just figure that part out. So my first thought would be like, how long have you been doing this? 4 years. And have you guys been putting capital in? Yeah, we both put in about 90,000 each. I'm like, how much time have you put in? Equivalent to probably another 6 figures each, time-wise. I'm like, what are you guys doing? You didn't check, you didn't figure out monetization yet? Like if it's gonna be there? Like that's the first, like I might be very passionate about a field, and as soon as I'm saying this is really one of my passions, I think I would really enjoy doing this, I just pick a number, how much money do I want to make, time frame, field, then I go search for my probability rate to see if that plan's even gonna freaking work. Now here's a couple of questions after question 4, what's the probability rate? The next question that I would ask would be sales goals, right? So by the time you're asking, don't think about fixed overhead right now. Definitely don't think about compensation of how you're going to compensate people. That's too early to ask that question. So the next thing would be, okay, my fixed range is in there, so I'm going to do this, right? I just get over the hurdle. I'm going to be successful. I don't have to be 1%. I'm going to do this. So by that time, we understand what the sales rate is going to be, right? Or excuse me, we need to have some sales goals. So we know what our product probably is or our service. I can get my product or service probably from this much cost, and I could probably sell this much. So what's my gross margin? And then I'm going to start making sales goals. After sales goals, then that's going to be before fixed overhead or compensation, because thinking about those sales goals, it's going to tell me if my fixed overhead's too big or too small. It'll give me more accurate data of what kind of fixed overhead I need and how to compensate people. That question should be after sales goals. Now, here's one point I want to make, and then we can just kind of take a lot of time for questions. But here's one point I want to make. I learned this over building a lot of businesses, and I learned it the hard way because I was always taught, like, somebody asked me recently on an interview, what's the difference? The host was saying, I've been in business for myself a long time, but I've never really considered myself an entrepreneur, she said. She's like, what's the big difference between small business owner and entrepreneur? Am I an entrepreneur? I said, I don't know, right? As we know, the difference is a small business owner at the end of the day builds a job, right? They first one in, last one to leave, sign their checks last, and technically they're self-employed, but they built a job. They built a shackle on their leg. They can never go in. They're inside the machine, right? They're a cog in a machine. They can never leave. And if you do leave to the Bahamas for 2 weeks, you come back, you're putting out fires, right? Because they built themselves in the business. Entrepreneur is a different animal. Entrepreneur is not afraid to get in the trenches, get his hands dirty for a few months. But going in from day one, he's thinking about putting processes in place and developing people to say, man, in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, I don't want to be working in the business. I want to be working on the business because I want passive income, right? And I don't want to have that tied to active hours income. So we know that there's a big difference there. But here's the thing, even for entrepreneurs in building a startup, you shouldn't have processes and systems in place too early. And everybody's all about processes and systems. I get it. They're necessary. But when you're in a startup, you have to not have processes and systems in place because you can have some basic parameters of how your business is going to function, but you're not thinking about efficiency at all, right? I know this global contractor that does a couple billion a year. He's a global contractor. You know what he told me the other day? He says, I always think about safety before efficiency. Okay, so think about that in the business world. Safety has to come before efficiency. So you can't have processes and systems in a startup because when you're in a startup, you're identifying problems, and then you might have to think of a solution and implement it within 48 hours. So you have to be a speedboat that can pivot on a dime, just bam, bam, like you're pivoting quickly, and you have to be really, really responsive, right? So if you have red tape and you have a department head, you think about the military or think about these major corporations with department heads. Let me talk to him and get that signed off, and then I'll go to him. You're a giant cruise ship that can't take 2 hours to turn. You know what I mean? You're just not responsive at all. So in the beginning of a startup, you have basic parameters of operation, but you don't want to think about efficiencies yet because you're still collecting data and pivoting, right? So you have to play fast and loose. For the first 3 to 6 months, you're playing fast and loose. You're collecting data, you're pivoting, and you're throwing it back out there. And then the wheels come off, it goes 5 feet and falls over. Where'd the wheels come off? You put it back together and you throw it back out there. You're collecting tons of data, you're pivoting and daily, right? Now, after you've gotten the bugs worked out and you find a rhythm that's working, then you put your processes and systems in place. So the speedboat's a little less responsive. They're not 3 hours from now, but they're saying, hey, we'll get back to you in 48 hours or within a week, we'll figure out. It's not as responsive, but now you have efficiencies created because safety's handled. Your safety, which is jeopardizing you and your family and your income, safety's handled now. So now we put processes and systems in place so we can actually create that passive stream. We don't have to be there. We're working on the business instead of in the business. That's very important because a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to build the whole damn thing before we even start. And they want, like, who's going to be in charge of this department? Where am I in charge? Where like department heads? I'm like, dude, that's too much red tape and bureaucracy. We just got to collect data and haul ass and fill it with gas and go. Right? It's like entrepreneurship is jumping out of a plane and then figuring out how to assemble the parachute on the way down. Like, that's what we're doing. And so anyways, I just wanted to make sure that we realize that.
Well, we got a couple more questions that come in. Joshua asked this question. He says, how would you determine the possibility or the probability rather for an apples to oranges situation? And what he means is, in other words, a category that is new, like Web3 is new, or smart data, it's that type of thing. How do you figure out the probability when something is brand new?
Such a great question. You're going to have to go to a different field, that has a similar behavior, right? And this might be hard to think about Web3, but let me give you a for instance. Years ago, this guy came to me, and I was helping him get funding, right? He came to me with an idea called build a book. Now, when I say build a book, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Build a bear.
Build a bear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I go like this, kind of explain to me what build a book is. He's like, well, you have these themes. You can slay a dragon, save a princess. You do already kind of written. And the kid comes in, says, I want to save a princess. I want this. And then there's like 4 or 5 other main characters. So you can have your best friends in 4th grade. Billy's going to be my best knight, and Johnny's not going to be in my book, but Sarah's my queen. You can kind of put all your variables in there and create this book, and then you leave with book in hand, and then they have a digital backup that you can pay like insurance if the parents lose it. Killer idea. So as soon as he tells me about it, I go, kind of like Build-A-Bear. He goes, no, not like Build-A-Bear at all, not even similar. I don't know, it seems like Build-A-Bear. He was so adamant that it's not even like Build-A-Bear, right? Well, that's a problem, because when you go for funding, if you're so unique, investors, we view it as risk. It's like, this has never freaking been done before, and it's so unique. I don't know if it'll work. So my risk goes up, right? So he tried 2 years on his own getting funding, and then finally I'm like, dude, you got to embrace Build-A-Bear, because Build-A-Bear has data. You can look at their financials. They're bringing in hundreds of millions. They're a global company. So we literally go into the investor's office and we say, hey, we got this company, and we start showing them all of Build-A-Bear's data, and they're in 50 states and this many countries, and they're doing this much. And he looks at us and he goes, do you guys own Build-A-Bear? We go, no, but that's basically our model. Now let me just show you a few ways of why we're better. So that mitigates risk, because I'm not trying to do something that's never been done. It's too risky. But I'm drawing a parallel to a similar field that has a similar behavior, and I can find the probability in that field based on that behavior, but then add some points to my probability rate because there's no other players out there. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that's a perfect example of, really there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. I mean, when was the last time new happened? Like I cannot, like when smartphones came out. Okay, was that new? No, it was a conglomeration of all these other pieces of technology that came together. So I think you're right, is that we look at the data that the access to, and then we pull that data together to make the probability metrics that we need to get where we're going to go. So good point there. We've got another question here from Ira. That says, if you found your probability rate to be more like 50% as opposed to the 70 to 90,
call me.
Would you would you adjust timeline to get it back to that, or do you? Yeah,
I would. So I've had some businesses that are like, I want to make this many millions of dollars in 24 months and this field. And it comes back like, okay, 49%. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to scale up the money. I want to make more. Because I know I can get over the herd, man. So I might lower the probability rate to say 20%. But I'm gonna just say that, I'm definitely not going to go in at 50% win. I'm gonna go for a little bit more, because I don't need the probability rate to be 50%. I need it to be, a little less than 20%.
So another question come in. Mark asked this: can you talk more about the time frame part of the triangle and how to conservatively arrive at that number? And I actually had a question related to this when we were first drawing out the triangle, which I made notes here on my own piece of paper. Is that how much do you want to make? What time frame do you want to make it? And then mortgage, or what field rather? And it was mortgage, $1 million over 12 months. Is time frame really that simple? It's like, I want to make X number of dollars over this amount of time. Is that what that is? That there's no secret to time frame. That's what that means.
No, you're just in the beginning. You're just picking random numbers, right? How much money do you want to make? What time frame? What field? That's basically pretty random, right? Question number 4 will tell you if you're too high or too low. So question number 4, what's your probability rate? That's going to tell you your number's too high, or your timeline, or your timeline needs to be drawn out. That's a choice, though. See, you don't have to move both of those things. You have to, if it's coming out that your probability rate, for instance, is only 9%. Now you have a choice. Do you want to take a little less money, go from $2 million to 1.7, or do you want to stretch out your timeline from 12 to 16 months? You don't have to change both though to increase your probability rate. You just have to either pull out the timeline or lower the money a little bit. But we won't know until we figure out the probability rate if those other two variables are proper. And in the case of Barry, the answer was we want the $1 million in 12 months. We want to leave those two fixed. I'm like, the only other thing is change the field. It gives us a better probability rate, but plays to our strengths. We have to adjust one of those three things.
Well, and I think, and by the mere fact, if somebody came to you with this plan, or to me as a business coach, either one of us, and they said, okay, here's the thing, here's the desired income, here's the time frame I want to make it, here's the field that we're going to do it in. Once we calculate the probability, it's like, okay, one of those three variables has to move. Well, by the nature of moving the bottom one, the third question, doesn't that elongate the timeline? Because if he's probably already pretty far down the road of going towards the mortgage business. If you say, well, you can't do it this way, you got to make sausage now. If you want to do this, you got to make sausage, you got to make tennis shoes, you got to sell sunglasses. Like that just elongates the timeline. So sure. Have you ever had anybody come to you and say, and you presented that like Barry, say, you got to change you can't be mortgage, it's got to be something else. And he says, well, if I change it to off a mortgage, it's going to elongate the timeline. So yeah, okay, I'll just do it over 18 or 24 months. So what do people usually do when that happens?
Sometimes it's related, right? So let's say real estate sales. Okay, well, your probability is not going to be there. But if we just we don't have to jump to a different tree, but just a little bit different branch. Okay, let's do real estate sales, but let's primarily focus in this niche. So we can just tweak it a little bit. Okay, you're going to be in the mortgage business, but what if we only did mortgages in this niche? Let's see what that looks like, right? So most of the time they'll adjust. They don't have to completely abandon ship. Sometimes though, I've had people say, dude, this business is so similar to this business that I could literally kill it in either one with my skill sets. Let's check the probability of that one. They're so closely related, and the behavior of those two things that he's wanting to do are so similar. I'll just say, well, this one's 9, this one's 29. Which one, right? Probably do this one. The other, sometimes what happens too is, again, it's not like I'm in the mortgage industry and now I'm like selling Christmas trees. Like it's not that different. So sometimes it's like, well, if I go out and identify the top 1%ers and I study, I think that I could take my skill sets to that field and within 4 months, at least get over the herd. I don't want to, I'm okay with 4 more months and I'm going to make that move. So we just have to figure out what our priorities are. But we're not going to know anything until we ask that fourth question.
So that's a good thing. I think it's just a matter of the sub variables. So you've got a variable, but there's a mortgage as an industry. Well, the sub variable could change. Like you said, you could niche down a little bit. We got another question that come in. What about what happens? This is Jules is asking this question. What happens like things like COVID, supply chain issues, cost of materials? Is it okay for your timeline to be pushed out, or you just adjust and keep on track? What do you think?
I mean, these are unforeseen occurrences that nobody can control. So again, it's very important not to have too many processes or red tape in place. Safety over efficiency, right? Because if we have so much of a process in place, our response time is going to be slow. So you get something show up at your door like COVID, you're going to die. You can't acclimate fast enough. However, both of us know a lot of entrepreneurs, COVID showed up on their door, they were able to turn very quickly and figure out how to monetize. So it's certainly okay to pull out your timelines because of unexpected circumstances. I've done that on several occasions. However, as you know, most entrepreneurs, they'll find more opportunity in things like COVID or OA or a down market than resistance. We'll figure out ways to actually have those things play in our advantage because the herd is dying and falling apart. So it's actually easier to get where we need to go.
Now, Tim asked this question. He says, if I incorporate fintech with mortgage and real estate industry, wouldn't that increase the probability? And I think what he's getting at here is if you got one industry, but you pull 3 pieces of the industry. So real estate, you've got mortgage, you've got insurance, and you've got sales, just 3 things off the top of my head. So if you combine all that, does that increase your probability, or are there other things to consider?
It could increase our probability if we have a very unique company that actually has there's a synergy between those 3 components. So it's okay, there's a saying that if you chase two rabbits, you don't get either. Some of us know that saying. But it's okay if it's the same tree, but it's three branches of the same tree, and there's a synergy, and this is helping this, and this is helping build this, right? But if it's three different trees under one corporate umbrella, probability rate's going to go down. So that's the question we have to answer. Is it three different trees, or is it one synergistic situation under one company that makes sense? That definitely could increase our rate and give us an advantage.
Yeah, people don't know. Most people don't know this, and I know you for sure know this. 10% plus 10% plus 10% does not equal 30%.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so many people think that's what that means. Well, I got a 10% chance here, 10% chance, and so that gives me 30. No.
Yeah.
That's not how that percentages do not add up that way. They don't work. And so, to Tim's point, it could, like, if you looked at the percent possibility, you got a 15% here, you got a 20% here, and you got a 30% here. That doesn't necessarily mean altogether it's going to be, was that 45, 55%? That's not what that means. We got to calculate, if you put that together, these two together, the 10% or whatever I said, 50% plus 15% doesn't equal 65. There's some other number that you've got to calculate. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
We had another question that's a little off topic specifically, but it relates back to something you said early in our episode today. And this is from Tracy. And Tracy asks, how probable is it to help or to mentor someone to create a company and generational wealth when they have very little assets to start with?
You don't need assets. Honestly, you need training. Like I said, I develop about 20 people a year. The deal I give is, I'm like, look, you're going to have to be an intern for 30 days. It's going to suck. Then you're going to be a paid apprentice for a while. And then I'm going to develop you really hard and fast to where at the end of the year, I'll back you financially in whatever you want to do. Right. And that's how a lot of companies that I have started, is honoring my deal. Like, okay, man, what do you want to do? And then we'll become partners in something. Right. I got a guy right now that was in here yesterday that I was developing. I literally was at the mall. I was getting ready to take a business trip, and I don't have any jeans. And I'm like, I need to buy some jeans, man. I'm going all these places. There's this place called The Buckle. I've never even heard of it. I tried all the big department stores. I walk in, I'm like, hey, what's your guys' deal? We sell jeans. I'm like, okay, I need jeans. What's your shtick? What's your unique selling proposition? People buy our jeans because they last 10, 20 years and they're really good designs. I'm like, cool. I buy a couple pairs of jeans. The kid helping me was sharp, man. And at the end, we're at the register, and he compliments a watch that I was wearing, and we just start rapping. And he says, I said, let me ask you a question, man. What's your long-term plan? He says, my parents are entrepreneurs, but they're not really the right people for me to be my mentor. So I want to find a great mentor. And so I pulled him right out of The Buckle, and he's in my program, right? On a scale from 1 to 10 right now, this kid, his business acumen's a 1. He has no assets. Okay, not important now. But in a matter of just a few months, you can have what it takes to start a real business. Here's the other thing. Sometimes I'll go through fields instead of passions to find a probability rate. Like, I want to make this much money in this time frame. I got to go find the field that will allow me to do that, and then make sure that I like it. Like, I won't do it if I don't like it, but I got to find out this much money. I want to make $50 million in this much time frame. Let me go look at 10 things, and I'm going to pick the one that I like the most, but gives me the probability rate. That's how we do it, is we figure out the math first, then pick the field. Of course, we have to be passionate about it.
Yeah, we got to be willing to suffer for the thing that we're building.
Yeah, right.
Well, Dan, this is really, really good information. I know that for me, when I first heard this information, you did another webinar with me earlier in the year, and we had lots of great responses from it. So I appreciate you sharing it again. We had another question come in. Let me just preview it. It's let's see. Okay, so Candace says a unique USP can have a synergistic game plan, multiple formats and demographics versus two rabbits, like you were talking about. So she says, I have a USP that in multiple markets and multiple formats that they can all embrace. They are generating money and an audience exists. The USP is strong. Choosing the best direction for the USP
is the probability rate. Sorry if that's actually, I'm sorry. I was reading that live and that doesn't, Candace, I'm so sorry. I'm butchering your question, but I'm reading it as you wrote it. And Dan, you got anything do you understand what she's trying to ask there?
Can we have her ask the question?
I don't think we can't, I don't think we have the functionality to do live. So
when I find a really good unique selling proposition, or I have a really good advantage, that definitely gives me a higher probability rate, right? So again, let's say that I'm looking at a field and I'm trying to collect data from the 1%ers and trying to figure out if my range is there, and I'm a little bit short. I come about 13, 14%, but I know I got an ace in the hole with something unique. I'll jump off the cliff because I know I'm going to be able to mitigate that risk in those 4 or 5 points, right? But I also I do want to just share one more thought, and this is a really important thought that to write down, and this is something that I think it was Megan. This will give you a little comfort. So all the data that you're trying to collect to answer that fourth thing, the fourth question, what's your probability rate? Where does the attrition start? That actually tells you if you should jump ship or you're in the right place, right? And then you can just strengthen your result. But here's what's interesting. All the data you need to know this is either historical based or it's present based data. None of it is future based, right? So it's findable. You might have to spend a few days and talk to some people and identify the 1%ers and send them an email and do some think of some unique Google search terms. But you can get the probability easier than you think. However, with that being said, this is something that this point that I have to make is the way that mathematics works is that you're in a business right now that, let's say, has 1,500 spinning plates, 1,500 variables. I don't need 1,500 variables because math allows me that if you have 6 or 8 or 10 of the right variables, everything else is going wrong, but you got 6 or 8 or 10 of the right variables. The way that math works is that I can manipulate those variables, right? And anybody can do this through data collection. So if you have 6 or 8 answers to your business now, you can spin those in different ways and look at data different ways, and it will eventually tell you all of the how. Not only what's historical based, but present based data that you may or may not have right now, but it will also tell you the future based data. So think about what I'm telling you. We don't need all the how, but if we have 8 or 10 variables, we can manipulate those in different, let's try higher price, let's try lower price, let's try this, let's try free, let's try this monetary. You just keep doing that with all your 10 variables. It's going to continue to give you data. And eventually it will give you all of the how, the section that's in historical base we already have, the section that's in present base that we may or may not have, but it will also tell you future-based data, right? So here's what I'm saying is, it allows us to go from the ability to project accurately to accurately predict. Now think about this. If you had a crystal ball and you could ask it any question, it would tell you historically, like what's going to happen. How long would you need that device to be generationally wealthy? End of day, right? There's so many applications if you think about it, knowing the future, you could be very, very wealthy. Well, here's the magic phrase. The difference between projecting accurately, which we all do in our businesses all the time, the difference between projecting accurately and having the ability to predict, which is a different ballgame, is only the presence of enough hard variables and belief system. Let me say that again. The difference between projecting accurately or having the ability to predict is only the presence of enough hard variables, 8 or 10, and belief system. So when people hire a mathematician or they hire someone, they're not projecting, man. The big companies like Apple, and they're not projecting, they predict, man. Math can tell you where to be standing at what time of day on what day. It'll tell you how, like a big catcher's mitt, stand here at 3:07 p.m. on July 12th, 2022. Like that, it tells you that data. It tells you future-based data. So as we both know, I'm not very smart of a guy. You know that already, Jason. But I'm always standing. I know how to predict to where I can be in the right place at the right time over and over and over, because math allows us to do that. And all the data you need to collect right now is available right now. None of it's future-based.
So let's pay attention to the three questions that Dan taught us today. Question one is, how much do you want to make? Question two is, what's your time frame? How long of time do you want to use to make that? Question three is, what field you're going to do it in. So get those three things figured out, and then go look at the probability. So what's the probability of that happening? And one of the questions that just came in is, what's that 17 to 19% versus the 85%? Well, what I think you're saying is, if the herd is working at 85% of everybody's doing something, but the top 15 are doing something better. And what you're looking for as an investor is to invest if somebody's in that 17 to 19% top tier. That's what you're meaning, right?
Yeah.
Any further explanation?
If I can just get my big toe out of the herd, and I'm just barely above the herd. I've even had deals where like the probability rate comes back at 25%, and I still got a whole foot in the herd. I'm just mostly out of the herd. If I can just be there, I haven't even overcome the herd and still hit all my metrics, I'm all in. Yeah, so as long as we can get over the herd, we're great. And that's the place we got to think about. And I think too, Jason, that we have to remember, we have to build the bridge. We have to have the fixed destination first, how much money, time frame, field, probability, then reverse engineer the bridge back. And it'll give you all the accurate health data and how to the starting point, like a GPS. We can't build a business linear to the cliff and then just use speculation of future market share to build a fake bridge. It will not work.
Well, I thank you, Dan, for being on the show, the Entrepreneur Master Series today. And for everybody that's out there listening, whether you're live in the webinar today, or you're listening to this on the Root of All Success later, or you're watching it on my YouTube channel, this is the type of coaching that I help provide to my clientele. My coaching platform provides opportunity to get access to people like Dan Vega, people that are coming on here and sharing their expertise. So if you're interested in getting more coaching like this, I've dropped in the chat room the link to my website. You can go to exitwithoutexiting.com and read about how to get involved in the next opportunity. I've got a business accelerator that's coming up, starts on July the 7th. It's 8 weeks, 1 hour at a time, live on Zoom with me, showing you the 4 core principles that you need to implement if you want to learn how to create that passive income from a business that runs without your daily presence. Just a little bit like what Dan was talking about today. The probability of you being able to do that is really high. It can happen. You can do it, but there are certain variables you have to put in place to make that happen. Because you registered for this EMS, you're also registered for the next one and all of the ones that are coming in the future. The next one's coming up on July the 26th at 3:30 Central Time with Dr. Amanda Barrientes. She is the CEO of NFA Money, and that stands for No Effing Around Money. She gets right down to the nitty gritty. And the topic for that one's going to be the top 3 money blocks that keep you from making money. And there is a mental block that will keep you from making money. And I'm going to talk about that on July 26th. And I'm actually in the works trying to plan another one for July 2. I'm going to get another one in July. But Dan, this has been such a pleasure talking to you, having you on the show to answer these questions, to go through this with everybody live. Any final words of wisdom you want to leave for the whole group today as we get ready to sign off?
Oh, I just want to encourage everybody again that if we're not hitting the success that we feel like we deserve, it might not be your fault. You could have the right industry, you're the right person, you're putting in the right amount of work ethic. We've just selected a few things. So my suggestion would be go back to the team, do an inventory meeting. And when I say inventory meeting, interview them, figure out what their strengths, weaknesses are, put all that data on the sand, relook at it. Because chances are by just manipulating or changing 1 or 2 of those variables, the whole thing will equate and you're going to have much more success.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here today. Please make sure you join us next time when we talk about the top 3 money blocks. Just go to Exit Without Exiting if you want to join my coaching program. Sign up and let's get going. Thanks for being here, everybody, today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at @TheRealJasonDuncan. Are you an entrepreneur who feels trapped in the weeds of daily operations, not experiencing the freedom you thought you'd have as a business owner? Want to know the way out? Take Jason's free exit readiness assessment to see how close you are to getting ready to experience true freedom and success as an entrepreneur. Go to amireadytoexit.com today. That's amireadytoexit.com. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.